What are your guys' genre expectations going into a movie called The Invisible Man?
Invisibility.
Yeah, and a man.
Oh my God.
This episode of Draft Zero is brought to you by ScriptUp. They are industry expert story and script consultants who don't promise that access to industry bullshit. They just want to make your script better.
They offer excellent service, giving you a report and, most importantly, a Zoom call to discuss your script.
We get approached by a lot of people wanting to advertise and sponsor this show, and they're the only ones we've let through so far.
We've used their service and can vouch for it. So if you're looking for experienced, independent insight into how your story and script is working, consider using ScriptUp. And if you tell them that Draft Zero sent you by using the promo code DZ10, then you'll get 10% off. Hi, I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chaz Fisher.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast where two emerging filmmakers and an established filmmaker for this episode try to work out what makes great screenplays work.
And today we are trying to tackle the overwhelmingly enormous topic of how to keep genre films fresh. And to do so, we have selected recent, extremely fresh feeling genre entries, Get Out, Promising Young Woman, and The Invisible Man, the 2019?
It was the last film I saw at the cinemas when lockdown was coming. I went and saw Invisible Man, I ate ramen by myself, and it was the best night ever.
But before we, reminisce what pre-COVID world was like, maybe, Stu, you could introduce us to our illustrious guest.
Yes, we are joined by Cody Bedford, can I say a former journalist?
Yeah.
But now screenwriter and director who's worked across many genres, which is why we wanted to bring her on the show. She's done shows such as Robin Hood, Squinters, Mystery Road, All My Friends Are Racist, Firebite, and the new Mystery Road Origin. So we're talking detective fiction, zombies, comedy, and you've also got a horror feature, I believe, coming up as well.
Yes, I do.
So you're someone who's worked across genre and does so. And you've also written a play.
Oh, yeah.
Who hasn't written a play?
Oh, and it was just staged in Belvoir, whatever. I was on the phone to my mum, who is a listener of this podcast, so I promised her I'll bring it up. And she's like, oh, I know the name. I was going to, Cursed. Yeah. And then she was like, no, I didn't see it because of COVID, so send my apologies. So my mum apologizes for not seeing Cursed.
That's okay. My mum didn't even get to see it because of COVID. My whole family's locked in WA at the moment, so they've missed out on everything I've done this last 2 years.
Including getting COVID. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I guess welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to talk these films. You chose an amazing topic, but also amazing films.
So I thought before we get into each film, it's hard to talk genre without, I guess, establishing what we think genre is, and I'm sure the three of us have three very different takes. Cody, what is genre to you?
You had to go to me first. I was about to Google it. To me, I mean, I work, of course, in the TV space. So when people go genre, they mean something that is not, and this is broad, not drama, not comedy.
So anything else?
Yeah. The other thing, the horrors, the sci-fis, the fantasy, which I don't know if I agree with that, but I mean, we'll probably get into this more. Traditionally, Australia does not do genre. So I'm very lucky to have dabbled in it, to be honest.
I mean, we've got different, I guess, parties to assess. Like, genre may mean something very different to an Australian broadcaster or producer,
yes,
to an Australian content consumer, to an Australian filmmaker, and all those different bodies separately. I mean, we initially started talking about this as being how to do elevated genre, because we kept on getting asked for what's the elevated take on this genre.
And then Gabe Darrick was like, don't you fucking dare. You ever use that?
He started sending us links to all the filmmakers who cursed the words elevated genre.
Gabe just killed our party.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
tweet that, Gabe. Love
Yeah, yeah. We're doing lowered genre. But I think partly we're really talking about is there's the tension between keeping something within a genre, right? This is my interpretation of our own topic. Keeping something within the genre while also trying to do something new with it, right? Because you always kind of want to push the genre because people have seen a lot of genre. Like, why watch a bad slasher film when there are so many classics of the genre or sci-fi or whatever? So it's like, how do you as a writer balance the need to keep stuff like up to date or contemporary or resonant, whatever word that you want to use, while also kind of being within a genre?
We initially had some different films in here, like Power of the Dog, where we've ended up kind of moving them into a different future episode that we will record God knows when, where you use genre tropes or genre tools on what is ostensibly a drama.
Yes.
Right? So you've got a straight drama, but you're using the trappings of the genre. Well, the films that we're analyzing here, we've deliberately selected because we feel that they are strong entries into their quote unquote genre, but manage to transform it, evolve it, move it, feel incredibly different while also fulfilling that. And I think, Stu, you've got, I'm hoping to segue / handball to you by saying fulfilling. What does a genre fulfill, Stu?
Oh, I've refined it since I called it the emotional contract, but I actually wonder if it's an experience contract, right?
Mine is much simpler, which is I think genre is a series of patterns, like it's shorthand.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, mine builds off that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that genre from a audience perspective, which means it's kind of from a marketing perspective, is about the emotion, the thinkings and the feelings that the audience kind of expects from a film, right? Or is promised either through marketing or because they picked it up in a particular thing. And so they've kind of got these ideas of what the thinkings and the feelings are that they're going to get from the film, what I call the emotional contract. But you could also call it, like, I'd say the experience in some ways is better because it's kind of broader. There are films that are aesthetic experiences that aren't necessarily quote unquote emotional or quote unquote like thinking. But let's just call it the emotional contract. And I think, how do writers manipulate emotions, right? The filmmakers can, when you make the film, you are manipulating emotions through editing and cinematography and all that stuff. But on the page, what do writers have? And I think that we've got setting, we've got characters, and I think we can dive a little bit more into like character type and what I would call character verbs. We've got plot, like structure, but structure being both like the overall plot, but also particular tropes or beats or moments that we want to see. We've got tone, right? And we've got commentary or theme, right? And I think all those kind of little wheels or dials writers can manipulate or play with to create the thoughts or the feelings of the audience experience, right? And I think the films that are kind of the trope makers within a genre, like there are these films that like we hold up, like 2001, this is a science fiction masterpiece and helps us understand what science fiction is in the context of film, have actually kind of established the conventions of what you do in those things, right? And that means if you are a filmmaker that wants to create the feeling of like 2001, you're going to look at 2001 and go, what choices have they made in those areas to create that feeling, right? And the examples of the feelings, I realize I didn't say this and maybe we can do it earlier. Like we actually use the name of the emotions in many of what we call genres. Horrors are horrifying. Thrillers are thrilling. Comedies are comedic. They make you laugh. Romances make you feel romantic or uplifting. Action films kind of actually give you a kind of buzz. Like they make you feel like adrenaline, right?
Yeah.
And detective and mysteries, I think, can be a little bit more intellectual. And I think we're not doing something like Knives Out. We have, but like I think a lot of the conventions around detectiveness is keeping the audience engaged with the clues. But I'm not the one who wrote on Mystery Road, like Cody. So it'd be interesting to hear about that stuff. So I look at these films that we've picked and I'm like, they're all kind of leaning into the conventions in some of those areas and actually changing the conventions, right? So my broad thesis is it's like whatever you can disagree with the way I've broken it up. But there are these conventions within the genre. And if you change one or two of the conventions, right, then you're kind of making it feel fresh, but you don't change them all because then you're basically in a different genre, right? Unless you somehow manage to change everything and give the audience that feeling of horror but I don't think audiences are necessarily conscious of like, this is exactly what I'm expecting. Maybe people just like space, all right? Or they just like swords. But then you get that problem of like, they're into fantasy and heroism, right? And the feeling of like all being good in the world and, you know, the world being triumphant, and then watch The Last Duel and it completely does not hit any of their expectations, and so they're disappointed by it, right? Because it's basically fucking medieval politics meets Rashomon.
Well, I was thinking also of Drive. Do you remember that lady in the States who sued the studio that made Drive because the marketing of the film was all like Ryan Gosling is like a getaway driver of an action film, and then it's like 90 minutes of Ryan Gosling staring into space interspersed with the odd shot of him stomping someone's head in. So...
which is a pretty amazing...
Wait, you can sue for that?
Well, I don't think she won.
It's like the person who sued over Ana de Armas being cut from another film.
Yeah, right.
One of the things I liked about your little spiel, Stu, is it gave us kind of areas to change, because to me, like, the goal here is I've got an idea and I feel there is a genre that fits this idea. Or maybe it's just like, I want to write a murder mystery, or I want to write a Western, or something like that. I mean, you and I have got an idea that's like got lots of sword fighting, and
we've got lots of ideas with sword fighting in it now.
Oh, I want in.
One that is mostly sword fighting.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to backfill that with actual like characters and stories such that it's entertaining and not just sword fighting. Although
you say
I've
that's
got
like a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, Cody, have you seen John Wick?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Now, to me, that was an amazing action film.
Yes.
I'm not sure what that did differently other than just like ramp all the genre expectations up to 11.
Yeah, I agree. It ticked all the boxes for what you want in a action film.
I don't think it subverted them per se.
No, not at all.
Other than the dog.
Well, I was about to say, all I could think of when I think John Wick, I just think the fucking dog.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yeah.
But is that subversion? Like, there's so many action films that is just man avenging grief.
I mean, that's what actually makes Promising Young Woman interesting, because it is a revenge tragedy, but it's focused on the female experience of that, right? And does not lean into being an action movie. It's not Death Wish, right?
And you also mentioned Knives Out, and that, to me, that was just like pure Agatha Christie genius. The one thing that it did differently was the point of view from which it told the Agatha Christie story. It wasn't being told from the detective's point of view, but from a suspect trying to cover up her inadvertent murder.
You can only get a John Wick made if you have a Keanu Reeves attached to it. Like,
yeah,
that's probably, I'm going into producer mode here. Like,
no, do it. That's part of it.
Otherwise, if you're pitching just a general action film, the question that the studio will ask is, what makes this different? What we've seen.
I've actually got one of my introductory questions here. What will attract higher budget and or better talent, right? Like, if you've got an idea, you've got to have it at least be fresh or different enough that it will bring on either investment or Keanu.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, Chaz, neither you or I are the hook when we present people a project, right? We're more of a liability than a bonus. So we have to find something else that's going to convince people that it's got something distinctive.
It's all about the actors. Writers are the low at the pecking order. No one's going to watch a film written by.
Except Jordan Peele. Yes, he's known as a director, but part of his voice as a director is absolutely connected to his voice as a writer, right? And it's because of people that Get Out that he can just be like Jordan Peele and show a trailer for his new film that doesn't make a lot of fucking sense, and people flip their minds for it, right?
Absolutely.
But he did have to make Get Out using the Blumhouse model first to get that power that he now has.
Wasn't the story how he got that made? He pitched it to a producer and the producer went, I've never seen this on screen before.
For Get Out?
Yeah. I probably read that in the Wikipedia, which I totally don't have up.
The other thing that I want to just not steer away from, but just acknowledge is there are films out there that genre swap all the time. There are hybrid films. Like, I think one of the things I love about Korean cinema is every 10 minutes, it seamlessly, you find yourself in a completely different genre.
Or Bollywood masala films, which are absolutely, as per the name.
So our bias and our limitation here somewhat is we are talking about like Western cinema constructs.
Absolutely.
Where you are kind of somewhat bound to the genre promise of the opening of your film to the end of your film, whereas there are other cultures where they seem to be able to have a lot more freedom in terms of those tropes.
Yeah, that is so true because, all of us as writers, like, we go in, we learn the craft, we're like act 1, act 2, act 3, hero's journey, blah, blah, blah. I tell you what, it's ruined a lot of films for me because I can always pick out how it's going to end in terms of Western cinema. The only time I was surprised in a cinema and could not guess how it was going to end was Parasite.
Mm.
And that blew my mind. Like, oh my God, they say they do things in 5 acts?
Well, the other, was it The Handmaiden? Oh man, that film just goes from being like class drama to being like a satire to being a slapstick comedy to being a horror movie to being like borderline lesbian porn.
Yeah, well, even Get Out, going back to Get Out. Sorry,
Well, no, let's start with Get Out. Yeah, go.
I'm taking over here. Jordan Peele, as an audience member, we're like, this is going to be funny,
Yeah.
This is a comedy. And I'm sure Jordan Peele went in with all his comedy skills and went, I'm going to structure this like a comedy.
So what do you mean by that? Like, what makes it feel like a comedy to you?
In terms of the premise, the basic premise that we think we're going into, black guy, is going to meet his white girlfriend's parents for the first time.
It's Meet the Parents.
Yeah.
Oh, no, but it's that Sidney Poitier film. There was a remake of a French film.
Yeah, guess who's coming to dinner, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
And then the shenanigans start. We then go into something very different once those shenanigans start, and something feels very unsettling, and then we're like, okay, this isn't what I expected this comedy to be. It's actually horror. So would you, in saying all that, is this a comedy first, horror second, horror first, comedy second?
So you guys coming up from the city?
Yeah, we're just heading up for the weekend.
Can I see your license, please?
He wasn't driving.
I didn't ask who was driving. I asked to see his ID.
Call me Dean and you're hungry, my man.
So how long has this been going on, this thing? We hired Georgina and Walter to help care for my parents. When they died, I couldn't bear to let them go.
So Get Out is a 2017 American film written and directed by Jordan Peele in his directorial debut. And it follows Chris Washington, a young black man who goes to meet the family of his white girlfriend, who uncovers shocking secrets when he meets the family of Rose Armitage. Like, it's a generic logline, but it's kind of is what it is.
Yeah. But to your point, Cody, like the cold open of that film very firmly teaches you, like if you came in expecting like a Key and Peele extended sketch with some gore, the film teaches you very clearly, very early on, the tone of the film and what it's going for. And it's got a very classic horror opening, which is someone walking along the street who meets the monster, and the monster gets them and drives off. And
the monster's unseen, they're being pursued. It Follows does exactly the same thing, right? It Follows has that great single shot of the girl coming out, running from something that's unseen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we can find other models of, maybe when we do an opening sequences episode, that do that.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because I hadn't even thought about the genre, and this is definitely kind of like my bias as like a white man. I hadn't really thought about Who's Coming to Dinner as part of the genre that feeds into the influence of this film. And I actually think films are like, is it a comedy, is it a horror? Like, I think films, these are all just conventions, right?
Yes.
And as much as I talk about the genre expectations of the audience, because that's kind of what producers are looking at, the fact is films themselves borrow elements from other things all the time, and that's going to be feeding into that, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of my own blinder.
Also, I find of working in Australia, of course, people do want to box you into that. You can only write comedy. You can only write drama. And I love that Jordan Peele has gone, I can do both. Or I don't know, he brings something that a straight horror writer or a straight comedy writer wouldn't be able to bring to a film. And I really appreciate that writing. It's the same with actors. I love when comedy actors take on a serious role. They bring something, their brain in terms of timing, beats, are really trained in that way. So more, like I'm surprised we haven't seen more people do
I think
the
part of it
crossover.
is like to be good at comedy. You're someone who masters involuntary emotional reactions from an audience, right?
Sure.
That's part of it. And what is horror? But involuntary, like mastering the ability to have the audience like in the palm of your hand, you know?
Mhm.
Something's haunting them and they open the door and then it's the little cute cat and they're like, ah, and then the axe comes in from behind them, right? And the audience freaks because they've just been laughing and then it turns, right? It's very kind of similar skill set, right?
Yes.
Well, to that exact point, Stu, like when we first meet Chris, he's packing up and it's like classic, guess who's coming for dinner with his girlfriend. They're driving out into the woods, you know, in a horror sense, like, you know, leaving behind reception and, you know, going where no one can find you. And he has a comedic call with his best friend, who's like the comic relief, who's very deliberately doled out for humorous pacing throughout the movie. And then as soon as that call ends, there's a jump scare where they hit the deer, right? They lulled you into this feeling of like relaxation and humor, and then, you know, smashed you back into the horror film, followed up by the cop scene.
Which is great because I always say Harbinger, and it's not Harbinger, it's Harbinger. But Harbinger just sounds like someone who watches a lot of television.
I've always said Harbinger, but is it Harbinger?
Okay, maybe it's that. Don't ask me how to pronounce words. But, you know, it's the classic, like, the gas station attention. Oh, do not go to the cabin in the woods.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is it connects to the theme, right? Because it's an uncomfortable scene because it's him being asked to hand over his license, even though he wasn't a driver, right? That he's being racially profiled by the cop. And it's just interesting that it tells you so early part of what the theme of the film is going to be, right? The jump scares the deer, but the inciting incident or whatever you want to call it, the horror moment, the deer may be an omen, but the actual moment of like, don't continue past this point is one, his friend saying, never go to the white girlfriend's place. And two, the cop kind of reinforcing that, you know? It's kind of interesting that it kind of plants that seed early. And maybe that would work in the Who's Coming to Dinner kind of genre, which I now wish I kind of did some research on.
So the reason why we wanted to do this film first is because I feel from a structural point of view, it sits very comfortably without subverting the horror tropes too much. It's like Jordan Peele has laid out a horror skeleton, and it will be other elements that you talked about, Stu, in terms of theme or tone or narrative or character. There are other levers that he's pulling that makes it feel fresh, because I feel like his emotional contract with the audience, the way that he's fulfilling it and keeping them engaged, is with very traditional horror tropes. So if I was going to summarize the story in broad sequences, the first act is just like creepy fish out of water. A black man in the rural countryside, you know, there's tense music over the long shot of the groundskeeper. There's the basement is sealed up. They point out that the next house is way over the lake. His new girlfriend's mother hypnotizes him. It's all just creepy as fuck, right? But it's not horrific in the same way that the opening promises it to be. And then to me, the moment where it actually shifts is like there's the big party, right? Which takes up most of the second act. And the moment to me it really shifts is when Chris goes upstairs, like he leaves the party and everyone goes silent and looks up.
Mm.
And that is the film telling you that Chris doesn't actually know what the fuck is going on, right? So the audience then knows that Chris is in a horror movie, but Chris doesn't yet know that he's in a horror movie. And the rest of the second act is Chris catching up to the fact that he's in a horror movie.
Yeah, Chris thinks he's in a comedy.
Yeah, exactly. And then the third act is like the really big, gory, climactic murder spree.
Escape.
Yeah. And I'm like keeping it very vague because I'm just wanting to point out how much it hits those genre tropes. And then I think when we get into the detail, we'll go, and this is where Jordan Peele has subverted those tropes, or this is where he's brought something that the genre has never seen before.
Broadly, this is a body snatchers film. Okay, because what the dark secret that Chris uncovers is that black men, or I think it's almost exclusive. No, it's not just black men. Like black people,
they've come into fashion.
Well, there's various descriptions of what people are interested in, but they're literally having half their brain sliced off, and these rich white people are taking over their bodies, right? So I'm just saying this broadly fits into a body snatching genre, right? And I think body snatching films have kind of got like different things they're exploring. I think on the one hand, they kind of connect to like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? Which I think, like, as the quote unquote first science fiction novel, is kind of about the commoditation of the human body, right? It kind of came at this kind of conjunction of the Industrial Revolution, where people were being seen as part of the factory, as well as kind of advances in modern medicine and the kind of the beginning of the deconstruction of the idea of the body being a vessel for the soul, right? So the body snatching is kind of exploring these ideas of the commodification of the human body, but they're also about people taking over because they know better than you. So I just finished watching Peacemaker, and spoilers because it's a new show for those who haven't seen it. Peacemaker is about a race of alien body snatchers that take over people because they want to control the government, because they know better than humans what humans should do to make their world better, right? So these are kind of the ideas that body snatching films explore, right? The commodification of the human body, and we really should be the ones in control. Like, Get Out is exploring those ideas, but through a more narrow focus. But I still think it's using the genre to explore ideas that are related to those. Maybe I'm wrong.
I love that analysis. See, you're so much well researched. I'm just making shit up. So excuse me.
Yeah, make it up. Go on.
Our audience knows that we make shit up all the time. Don't you worry.
Yes, it is a body snatchers film. Yes, I agree with that. And I think what makes this fresh, and I'm saying fresh in air quotes, you can't see me, fresh, is that the theme for me that it's exploring is, one, slavery is the big theme, overall theme, and two, a black man's role in the woke America. I did air quotes again. This is what a genre in terms of horror does so well. It can talk about these issues through this narrative of basically a black guy going to a white girlfriend's parents' house to meet them for the first time. And that, for me, is what makes it fresh, is like the theme.
But like, it seems so obvious, but it's like, if that's the thing you want to explore, that means you got to change one of the characters that's traditionally part of this genre, right?
Yeah.
Which is the character, instead of being a white man or maybe a white woman, ends up becoming a black man, right? And because their way of integrating, or I think the word you used in this interview I read with, I'm pointing at the screen. I read an interview with you before you'd spoken with Screen Australia, talking about some rules from writers' rooms. And one of the things you talked about is the way that a character navigates the world, right?
Yes.
I think it's such a great idea. Okay. Like, it's such a great concept for writers because it's tied to action. What is the way that people act within the world they're in? And I say this as a white bloke, you know, my experience of navigating the world is going to be different, but they change that character. They naturally have to change other aspects of the story, right? Because his way of navigating it, and if plot is character, right, because it comes from character, then the way he navigates that world will change the plot in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there have definitely been films out there, you know, particularly in the horror genre, but other genres as well, where the one key thing that you change might be who the protagonist is, right? And that has this flow-on effect throughout the movie. I think Get
Ripley.
Out, yeah,
Ripley and Amy.
I think Get Out, in a way, if I was pointing to which lever Jordan Peele is pulling more than anything else, it really is that theme of slavery that Cody is talking about. So I've watched it, I think, 3 times, most recently a couple of weeks ago. And what I hadn't realized until the third viewing, and look, this is so the point of view of a white dude, but I hadn't realized how, until I was looking at it through this lens, how they discuss race in every single scene of the movie. There is not one scene of the movie where Chris's race is not discussed in some way.
But also even the opening scene where Chris isn't. The man who snatched is like, oh, I'm like a black man alone in the street. I can't remember the exact line or play it. It specifically draws attention to his experience of the world.
Yeah. And so I like scenes that I thought were like perfectly, you know, in my head, I remembered them as just being standard genre scenes that's moving the story on. They end up revolving around race. Like even the dinner scene where the brother has come in and he ends up wanting to like wrestle him because he's like threatened clearly by a black man's physical superiority.
But yeah, oh man. I mean, I'm hanging the hat on it, but it's also like he's threatened by it, but like there's a longing for it, but not.
Oh, yeah.
But as an object.
It's fetishized.
So it's kind of like the
Yeah.
commodification of the body. It's like the objectification of Chris. Like Chris is objectified. Like people feel his muscles, right? Yeah, you're a great photographer, but that's because you've got eyes and I should have those eyes, right?
And the one element of this, and again, this is my like white dude blindness for the previous viewings, but the one element of this that really came through so amazingly well on this viewing was how the grandparents actors played their roles. So what you end up finding out is that the cook and the groundskeeper, who are both black, and initially it's like awkwardly discussed. It's like, oh yeah, it looks really awkward that we're a white family with 2 black staff. But it turns out that those bodies are inhabited by the guy's parents, the Bradley Whitford character's parents, and their performance. I hadn't realized, like in my first viewings, I was like, oh, these are just really creepy performances. But no, they're playing like 1950s white people in these black bodies, and they play it so incredibly well, those actors. You know, like the way the groundskeeper talks when they have that discussion.
She is lovely, isn't she, Rose? Yes, she is. One of a kind, top of the line, a real doggone keeper. Right.
Georgina's reaction when Chris says, too many white people, I get nervous.
Right. All I know is sometimes, if there's too many white people, I get nervous, you know?
I do something. That's not my experience. Not at all. The Armitages are so good to us. They treat us like family.
Right? Like, it is just so sublime. So to me, like, I reckon Jordan Peele in every single scene, like if he wrote out the skeleton, he's now going back into every scene and going, how is this scene going to not just move the story on, but also comment on this discussion of the commodification of black bodies and slavery?
My favorite ever writer, lecturer, Meg LaFoe, always says, your theme has to be in every single scene for it to make the final cut. And I just love that. Like, that blew my mind. I was like, wow, Get Out does that.
How do you apply that? I mean, that sounds like an interview question, but how do you apply that to your writing? Are you conscious of your theme?
Yeah, I used to think, because I'm a character writer, and that sounds wanky, but some people aren't. some people write plot over character, and that's okay. We need those people too in the world.
Thanks.
Why, thank you,
Thanks.
Cody.
Makes me feel seen.
Did I say that? No, I wish I could write more plotty stuff, but I love character psychology so much. So I've had to train my brain into thinking thematically, and it's really helped me in terms of writing. So now I'm very conscious of, if I'm writing a TV script, I want the theme in the first 2 pages, like pretty much said out loud in a first draft and then subtly pulled back. So that kind of changed the way I'm thinking. But now I look at films and the 3 films you kind of presented, and they're all there. Like it makes it, I don't know, like I wasn't aware watching it at the time, but when you go in to analyze it, like, oh my God, yeah, I was tricked into learning something.
Like, I think all 3 films that we've chosen have really strong, clear themes, right? But I feel like Get Out is the one where the lever that they've pulled to keep the genre expectations feeling fresh and different is theme more so than the other ones. I think the theme in the other ones ends up coming out strongly from other levers that they've pulled. But Stu's looking at me very in disagreement. But and we can have that argument when we get to the other films. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is, before we move on from Get Out, is the ending that they changed. And I think that's the perfect example of actually choosing the genre over, like they made a change to fulfill the audience contract, like you said, Stu, the emotional contract, over choosing theme. Or I guess it reflected the theme in a different way.
It gave the promise of catharsis, right?
Yeah.
Usually I'm like, that maybe that wasn't in the director's vision. Why don't we go that? But I'm really glad they did change the ending, because I watched this in a cinema, and it was the first time I'd been in a cinema for a very long time, like in terms of years, watching all these films over the last 10 years. And I went to see Get Out, and it was a full cinema. And at that point, that very amazing fucking scene where the lights start shining and the whole audience went, no, like you could hear them gasp. And I'm so glad I was in that audience, because it was just normal Broadway Sydney audience. And I'm like, wow, even though they went with the happy ending, you still felt it in that moment. And I think that's enough.
100% agree. Just for anyone who isn't aware, who may have seen the film but isn't aware of the original ending, and it was, when the film came out, just kind of talked about in interviews, but I think the actual original ending is on the Blu-ray extras now.
Yeah, and that means you can find it on YouTube because people keep on uploading it. They try to swat it like whack-a-mole, but it's still there.
But Chris is lying there, having escaped from the house, and by escaping, having to have murdered a whole lot of white people, and some black people as well, but black people who've had their bodies stolen by white people. And he's lying there, and flashing police car lights come up. And in the original version, the Jordan Peele shot, it was actually the police, and they arrest him because he's a black man.
Yeah. And it's the cop from the beginning, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, Cody, like that moment when you see the flashing lights, it forces everyone actually to confront the truth of how the police treat black people. Like, we've just seen him on his whole journey. We know that he's completely justified in his position.
Yeah.
And we're terrified for him. And then we see the flashing lights, and the fact that everyone reacts with fear for Chris in that moment, that does what Jordan Peele needs that moment to do.
What I noticed about it is that, yes, it's doing this kind of thematic exploration that's, you're talking about slavery and experience of black man in woke America, and I'm looking at it through more abstract lens of like the objectification of the body. I don't think they're unrelated. But what is interesting is it does lean into other conventions, right? Like the mad scientist lab, when Dean Armitage, like Bradley Whitford's character, is like cutting it. It's like something out of like classic 1950s mad scientist kind of sci-fi horror. And I think that's deliberate. Like, it is reminding you that it is part of this genre, okay? And even the kind of the weird, not Stepford Wivesness, but in that vibe of like the housekeepers, of there's something being strange because they're like all communicating together, is part of the kind of conventions of the genre. Even the jump scare around the deer, I mean, The Invitation did something as well like that. That it is leaning into some of those conventions to kind of orientate you. So it's almost like a scientific method that, like, if you want people to be thinking about the theme, and if you want them to really have that moment when those lights flash at the end and go, oh shit, I have learnt something here, then you actually kind of don't want to change too much. Because if you change too much, then they might end up focusing on those other differences. It's still hitting the beats of that. I mean, what is interesting is, you know, I think one of the most interesting things about Get Out is that I don't want to get overly technical. I think it's kind of in 5 acts, but because the middle act is the garden party, right? When all the friends coming in, I actually think that is really unconventional structurally for this kind of film, that you would have what is going on in there, right? But that's because it's all about exploring theme. The plot is suspended. There's a question of like, what the fuck is going on? But all the conversations are focused on Chris and his experience in that moment and how uncomfortable thing it is. And there is this question of like, what the hell is going on? Why are these people here? But it's actually about exploring the theme. And I think that is structurally the most unconventional part of that film. It kind of, does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, to point out a contrasting example to what you're talking about, I felt the near the end of the second act, it was actually the genre was weighing it down, in that the film had to work really hard to keep Chris at the party and in the house
instead of just leaving.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like it had to work really hard. And the bit about the box, like the cupboard door just being open and him spending time like going in and rifling through this girl's like photos, just that was the bit, like it felt like genre blindness. Like Chris didn't realize he was in a horror movie
because he thought he was in a comedy.
Sure, but I guess by that point the film had moved so much that there's like that. This is almost a perfect film, and I'm not trying to be critical here. Just in terms of us talking about genre, that's where it was like the genre setting needed Chris to stay. And I felt it kind of rebelling against that structure or those restraints.
I will say I did feel kind of attacked when Rose started listening to Patrick Swayze's She's Like the Wind. That was kind of very rom-com territory.
You mentioned a couple of times this idea that Chris believes he's in a comedy, right? So if you're this, character writer, how does a comedic...
You just laugh at that.
How does a comedic character... No, because I'm like, it sounds like you write characters. What, but like, if we talk about like, what does then a comedy character do that is different from a character that is in a drama or in a horror? What is it, the way they act, right? How do you think about it as different? It's just interesting to me, this idea that you could have like a character type being related to a genre, right? Because we're not doing a detective show, right? But detectives, they're great characters to write because they investigate. That's their verb, right?
Yeah.
And it's this idea that I picked up from writing from games where you actually list the verbs that the player character can do and what they can't, right? And I like this idea that a character might have a primary verb, a way that they navigate the world. And like, is a comedy character, like, Chris is he the protagonist? Does he actually drive the story? Right? Like he feels like he feels like he's someone who's quite like he doesn't fight people. Like he's someone who's very conscious of his place in the world. In that way, he's a little bit more of a comedic character. He's not, but like as a comedic character, I don't know, like is he the straight man? I'm trying to work that out now.
But his whole journey as a character was him getting over his guilt at sitting and watching TV while his mother was dying, right? So his character flaw or wound or whatever is that he just sits and lets terrible shit happen to him. Like, that's quite deliberate. He is quite a passive protagonist, but I would say he's the protagonist. Otherwise, it's Rose.
Right? Yeah, it's definitely him. Like, he wants, Like, he checks and he decides to go. He could have not gone to this weekend.
I was just, you made me think, like, he's in a situation, very reactive. That kind of does scream comedy, doesn't it? Comedy lead.
Yeah.
He's the straight man under pressure.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because it's like your writer's nose picked that up early on. Like, he's someone who thinks he's comedy. He doesn't think it's as insane as Rod is telling to him. Like, Rod is telling him the whole time they're going to take you for a sex slave. He's like, no, they're just fucking weird. So part of what it makes it feel fresh is the character is a straight man in a horror. What should we do next? Invisible Man or Promising Young Woman?
I'm reading the Wikipedia page here.
For Promising Young Woman.
Which describes Promising Young Woman as a black comedy thriller film. So there's comedy again.
Good God almighty. You know, they put themselves in danger, girls like that.
It was a perverted thing to say.
You'd think you'd learn by that age, right?
Please lay down. What are you doing?
It's okay, Kate, you're safe.
What are you doing? Hey, I said, what are you doing?
I think this is a good example to delve into because rather than do one genre and keep it fresh, it is two very different genres interweaving each other.
Really?
Yeah.
To me, it's a rom-com and a thriller.
Of course, I completely... Yeah, it was the one film I didn't get to rewatch. I also read the Wikipedia article to refresh.
We're all there.
I forgot about the whole second act being rom-com.
Yeah.
Well, and the second half of the first act. Like, as soon as she meets Bo Burnham's character.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
Okay, so Promising Young Woman. And look, this is I think, somewhat controversial film. Like, I think the three of us loved it, but I think there's also some people who we would all love and respect who reacted quite negatively towards this film based on their experience of the themes in this film. But it is the story of a young woman who's just turned 30 or turns 30 during the film, who leads a double life. During the day, she works in a cafe, and during night, she holds herself out as bait to try and trap particularly predatory nice guys, men who think that they are good, and tries to confront those men with their own predatory behavior.
What do you want from me? Say that I'm an asshole? Fine, I'm a fucking asshole.
Whoa! Why are you so freaked out, Neil? You really need to calm down. At least you didn't try and have sex with me while I was passed out. You do get points for that. A few guys, yeah, they don't mind so much, but you woke me up before putting your fingers inside me. That was sweet.
Are you trying to say that I'm like a predator or something?
I don't know. Are you?
I am a nice guy.
You keep saying that. But you're not as rare as you think. You know how I know?
No.
Because every week I go to a club, and every week I act like I'm too drunk to stand. And every fucking week, a nice guy like you comes over to see if I'm okay. You want to fuck me still?
7 years earlier, her best friend Nina Fisher was raped by a classmate called Al Munro. There was no investigation by the school or consequences from the legal system. And ultimately, this led to Nina committing suicide. That's the full knowledge that we have by the end of the film, but the way we kind of experience it is a little bit different.
I came here to talk to you about something that happened 7 years ago. You probably won't remember a client named Alexander Monroe. You helped so many boys like him. And you most certainly won't remember the girl who you threatened and bullied till she dropped her case.
I remember her. Nina? Was that it? I'm sorry, I don't remember her full name, but it was Nina, though, wasn't it?
Yes.
I remember her. Have you come here to hurt me?
Do you want me to hurt you?
I think so.
And the biggest initial subversion it takes, which is the opening kill, like it's leaning into a very similar genre convention of Get Out, and not Invisible Man is not the opening kill, but it's still like the opening action sequence, is that you think she has killed someone. They do this incredible shot where she lets herself be bait, gets picked up by these two men. One of these men's like, I'll give you a ride home, why don't you come up for a drink, etc., etc. And then we are deliberately cut away from whatever she does, and we see red liquid dripping down her arm, and it's revealed that she is eating a donut.
A hot dog, I thought. Not that that is an important detail.
That is an important well, a hot dog is phallic, and a donut is sapphic.
I've looked up the Wikipedia page. It doesn't give me any answers.
But the point is, it's revealed that it's not a kill. And so it uses the genre convention to draw you in, that we're expecting her to have some kind of revenge, like bloody, violent revenge. And it is turned out that she is not killing these people, but we don't know what she does to them until later, right? This idea that she kind of confronts them with her behavior is a reveal.
The opening sequence is immediately leading into lots of genre elements, but like as a mystery. And the question I've got asked here that's posed by the cold open that kind of sustains it until it reveals what she's actually doing is the emotional contract that this cold open sets up with the audience. The question that it poses is she a serial killer that preys on predators?
Okay, that's your interpretation. I think the emotional contract of a revenge film is catharsis. Right? You just want catharsis. It's often violent, but I think revenge films being violent is a more recent phenomena. Like, you know, the Death Wish and the Taken of the world and all that stuff. They're basically action movies that use revenge as a motivation. But, you know, like Three Billboards is about revenge, but it's not necessarily violently cathartic. Inglourious Basterds is a revenge film, and it has a violent catharsis at the end of it. But like, and you know, is Richard like Hamlet? Hamlet's a story about a character seeking revenge, and he doesn't kill anyone until the very end.
Yeah. So where this film actually, like you're right, you know, part of the 60s and 70s exploitation movement appropriation of the revenge thriller is things like Death Wish and I Spit on Your Grave. And more contemporary versions of that you might say Taken is the Taken series is kind of along those lines. But to me, the thing that all the revenge ones, whether you're talking about going all the way back to Hamlet and possibly beyond Hamlet to now,
I'm sure the Greeks wrote about revenge tragedies.
I'm sure. I mean, I think I was in a performance of, oh God, now I've forgotten her name.
Antigone.
Antigone, yes. Thank you. Well done.
I love the surprise in that. Oh, look at you.
But they all those films revolve around the question of will that character be consumed by their revenge or let it go?
Well, I mean, that's what revenge films are concerned with, the question or the idea of, like, you know, when planning revenge, dig two graves. Isn't that the saying?
Yeah. And this film is very much asking that question. Will Cassie's search for revenge consume her or not?
And I think spoiler alert, I think it delivers on that question, and it delivers the catharsis at the end, right? Like, I think the film is effective as a revenge film, right? I think some people that maybe are disappointed with it was because they were expecting it was going to be more spit on your grave, that she's going to be killing these people, right? Because they want violent catharsis, and the film is kind of actively resisting violence in that sense. I don't know. So how do you think it keeps it fresh?
It's funny because I was really thrown by this film in terms of it is really different. Different in terms of what I'm like, what is this? What is this? And I guess the contract I expected, I'm going to take that from you, Stu, is, the action revenge film mostly, I'm generalizing here, mostly starts with the death of a wife or rape of a woman, and that
Death of a dog.
death of a dog, and that propels the protagonist into revenge mode. And we do kind of start with like the violation of a woman's body, but yeah, her revenge kind of gets put on hold by a love story, right? And then we're back to the revenge, but she dies for her revenge. I don't know. I'm still working out this film, basically.
I'm curious. Did you like it?
I don't know. This is what I mean. I'm confused as to what, and when you talk about the contract, I'm confused as what I've just been contracted to.
Which is great. That's a great response to go, wait, because the film was told me it was about revenge and then turned into a romantic comedy and then it's back on the revenge.
Yeah, but was it revenge? Like, I want to know, and this is what I'd love to ask the writer-director. Who is this film for? Because for you, yeah, not for me.
Yeah, this is my lived experience. I do not need to see, is it that? Is it that this is not necessary? Like,
yeah, and this is like this won a fucking best original screenplay Oscar, right? This film. And I'm always so happy when a woman wins this award. It's the award I actually follow. Big surprise. But when I watched the film, I was like, so thematically, what are we talking about here? Like woman's place and space in, I guess, this era of Me Too, and violence against women and their bodies, and not being believed. That all those issues, like that's kind of the theme I read into it. It's very, very obvious in the dialogue, isn't it?
This film is not subtle, just to be clear.
It's not subtle.
Oh, I think in my Letterboxd review, I was like, this feels like transcripts from Slasher Nice Guys. So there's a subreddit where people literally share, like screen share or transcribes conversations they have with people that are like, I'm a nice guy,
Yeah.
I'm a nice guy. Why don't you want to go out? And then there's no response. And they're like, fuck you, you bitch, blah, 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 blah. Like,
maybe I was just searching for more subtlety. I like subtlety in my writing. That Get Out had.
Get Out wasn't subtle about its theme.
I don't think it was, but I reckon Get Out, compared to this film, would have failed my test, my opinion, if they ended it with Chris being arrested with the original ending, because I'm like, that's what you're trying to say. And this one, I would love to just sit down and talk to the writer. I don't know. How do you guys feel about it?
I mean, we can talk through the structure of it, but before we do, given that you brought up the ending of Get Out and compared it to this, to me, this is one of those movies that, for me personally, the ending made the movie, where it was trucking along, where I was like, I am enjoying this experience, but it's not blowing me away, until that ending where I was just like knocked out of my seat by the ending. And we can obviously talk about that, but I'm just wondering whether your emotions about the film are because of its lack of subtlety or the fact that it's, trying to be satirical. And, one of a former guest and friend of the podcast, she reacted very strongly to the direction of it more than the writing.
Oh, Mel, yeah. We talked about the direction. The kind of center framing Wes Anderson, slightly proscenium.
And the art design as well.
Yeah, look, because that made it more comedy, didn't it? The thing.
Mm-hmm.
The whole feel of it.
Yeah.
Tone. So that's one of the levers they pulled, is tone.
I think I actually liked the ending. It went there, didn't it? It just went, no, let's just go and be unsafe and go there.
Mm-hmm. But this is like the anti-Get Out, this ending.
Yeah, this is the anti-Get Out. And I don't know about you guys, but when I first watched it, you're like, she's not dead.
Because it's a complete subvert. Like, you're like, surely there's like 20 minutes or 15 minutes. How is this film going to end?
And then she's dead. but maybe that's saved by the technique of her ghost still lives on.
Yeah, Cassie. So Cassie, which is the character played by, this is me reading the Wikipedia as well, Carrie Mulligan, right, who's the guy that she ends up going to the party for?
Al Monroe.
Okay, so the genre convention that is hitting in terms of revenge is that she's basically got a shit list of people that were involved. She blames for the death of her best friend, right? So her best friend has committed suicide after she was raped and humiliated in front of a group. And the video images was shared. And so Cassie has got a list of people that she is going through and taking revenge on, right? That is a real classic revenge structure. I mean, that's like Harry Brown. You know, these are the list of the people I'm going to hunt down. I'm pretty sure that's how John Wick works, right? These are the people responsible. And
Kill Bill, the classic.
Oh, of course. Talk about like revenge films that are female focused, right?
Yeah.
And she comes to the big boss who basically meets Bill. Like, this is kill Al. And she has the climactic confrontation with Al. And he actually realizes what's going on and kills her. And you have this moment, like the low point of the film is like, oh, he's won. Right? And you think it's going to be like that in the other ending of Get Out, which is like, women are not believed and they ultimately will be victims of male violence, right? And so you kind of don't have the catharsis from revenge, right? And then the movie continues. And you're like, hang on, what's going on here? Why is this movie still going on?
And because I was so like had the rug pulled out from under me, I didn't have a genre promise to hold on to.
Yeah, right.
So suddenly I was like, I have no idea how this movie is going to end. What the fuck is going on? If this movie ends this way, where Al Monroe fucking gets away with it, I am going to smash something.
Because Al's getting married. She hunts Al on her kill Al mission, dresses up as the stripper for his bachelor's party. Right? And it's like, is Al going to get married while she's dead? Is she going to be yet another victim of male violence that is forgotten? And she is not.
Can I take us back and just kind of, again, walk through the major beats of the movie and how they may sit within respective genres?
Yes.
Because I think, I'll reiterate the point, I think what Emerald has done here is interweave two different genres, and the genres almost act as the force of antagonism on the other one. So the rom-com story stops her from being a successful revenge killer, and the revenge killer story stops her from being a successful rom-com participant.
Yes.
Rom-com character. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
So that while it starts out as a murder mystery, is she a serial killer preying on predators? She has the meet cute with the Bo Burnham character whose name I can't remember, but
Ryan
Cooper.
Okay. The casting of all the nice guys in this film is sublime.
They're all played romantic.
Yeah.
Like Adam Brody and Christopher Mintz-Plasse and all these guys, like, it's amazing.
Yes, well-known romantic lead, Christopher Mintz-Plasse.
Yeah. Not romantically, but a nice guy. Like someone you feel sorry for, like pity for, rather than fear of, right? Because the thing that I would distinguish, Cody, when you were talking about the themes of this film, you were talking about violence against women and women not being believed. And I think what this film is delving into, and perhaps this is why some people don't react well to it, is it's not actually talking about Cassie very much at all. It's talking about what nice guys get away with.
Yeah.
Right? Not all men. It's not like, it's actually saying, here's the good men in the world, the doctors, the pediatricians, the, successful people getting married, having kids, the success story, the good men of this world are also complete fucking shits. To me, is the theme of this.
Actually, this is what makes it similar to Get Out. Now you're saying that. I completely agree with this. And it says what makes this film fresh, as Get Out explored the woke America, and even woke America can be fuckwits. This is saying, I say that so eloquently, this is exploring the nice guys. Like they're not evil monsters.
And it's not really about her at the end of the film. Like,
No.
it's so not about her that she's dead for the last sequence of the movie.
Yeah, we're exploring, the nice guy's role. And the guy that literally observes violence against women and doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything, you're a douche too.
Wait, is that? I don't want to look at that, Cassie.
Why not? You were happy to watch back then.
What are you talking about? I wasn't.
But it's his face that the film ends on.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually wondered, I don't know if you guys agreed, if she went into that party knowing she would die.
Well, I think that is proven by the letter that she sent to the lawyer and the scheduled text messages.
The control, she's very much a character who controls everything. So she basically went into suicide and...
Control. It's interesting to talk about like character verbs, the idea of characters having this king. Like, she's very controlling. And that is actually the kind of character in a revenge film, right? Keanu Reeves absolutely controls every situation he's in, in John Wick, right?
Yeah, we love Keanu.
Leano Neeson in Taken. Right, he has a particular set of skills, right? Like, his competence is not in question, right? Her competence, Cassie's competence in the revenge stuff is not in question. Right. And so, like you're assuming like maybe it feels like defeat because her competence is finally undone and then it's revealed that like, haha, she's actually the most competent, she's still.
That's why I don't think I ever believed this film was going to end like that. I knew there was something up her sleeve. And now thinking about it, that's why I believe she went in there planning to die. Yeah.
And I think I said happy to die. I think not just planning to die, wanting to die.
Yeah.
Because, like, the film is called Promising Young Woman, right? And the pull from her parents and, the rom-com storyline for her to fulfill that promise of being a promising young woman and being a doctor and leading the normal white suburban life is one that she pointedly turns away from at the end once she sees that footage of her friend being raped.
And knowing that her boyfriend, Ryan, was there, right? So coming back to this idea that there's this A plot line that's the revenge story and the B plot line that is the romance, the romantic comedy storyline is undone by it actually becoming part of the revenge, right? Because in a way it is saying that if you think you're in a romantic comedy, the person you are romancing is still part of rape culture, right? That this ideal, because for me this film is about rape culture and how it happens, and it's very confronting or should be confronting as a male, that this is something that we perpetrate and create and defend and protect, and that's what it is, right? It's just interesting that it's using that device. And I just want to compare it to Get Out because I actually think it's similar, right? There's this great line from Robert Cargill, says, great horror movies often start out as one genre until an even better horror film interrupts them, right? So Get Out is kind of the fish out of water meeting the parents storyline being interrupted by an even better horror film. What is interesting is this is a revenge film that is derailed. It's like the opposite, derailed by the romantic comedy until the revenge film interrupts it again, right? And that's kind of interesting.
It's not just one turn. It's actually repeated beats throughout the whole story because she has in the first act, she has the meet cute with Ryan. Her boss at the cafe wants to promote her. Her parents are like, trying to give her a suitcase to encourage her to go and travel, right? And so it's showing that her predatory behavior, her revenge obsession is interrupting her life. Right?
Yeah.
And then the scene with the McLovin character with Neil shows what she's actually doing. She's not murdering these guys. She's just confronting them with the fact that they're rapists, right? That they're not good people. I think even Christopher Mintz-Plasse has a line like, "Do you want me to say I'm an asshole? I'm an asshole, okay." Like,
I was just so offended by the picking on David Foster Wallace. Anyway, I read Infinite Jest when I was 16, so obviously I'm a very sophisticated and intelligent male with deep emotional capacity.
She keeps a notebook, and Stu, you and I are talking about doing a different episode on talismans. There is a clear talisman in this film, which is her notebook of her conquest. She writes down their names and marks them off as a tally.
And we've introduced that early, thinking it's the people that she's killing on her revenge list.
Yeah.
It's actually a convention that's subverted.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're essentially random in that she's not like picking out people to chase. She is holding herself out as drunken bait in nightclubs and waiting for these quote unquote nice guys to pick her up. So at that point, it's a random obsession. And it's only when she has the follow-up date with Ryan and he mentions Al Monroe that she is pulled back in.
Yeah.
Right? And that's when she goes and writes her list of the people she's targeting, including Madison, and it says chapter 1. Like the mention of Al Monroe and the fact that Al Monroe is back and that he's getting married, that pulls her back in and she formulates her revenge plan. Like that's actually the second act is her revenge plan.
But you watched this more recently than me. Does it use chapter breaks?
Yeah, it's got a title.
Oh, it's literally doing Tarantino.
Yeah.
It's doing Tarantino's use chapter breaks in pretty much all his films, doesn't it?
And with the name of the person that she's doing. And then near the end of the second act, she has this wonderful scene with Nina's mum where Nina's mum says to Cassie, don't be a child. Like, get over it. Like, move on with your life. This is not helping Nina, what you're doing, this obsession with her. And she actually does decide to move on, which is dramatized by her throwing the notebook away, right? And they have the wonderful Paris Hilton sing-along in the pharmacy. Like, it's pure rom-com.
It is
right?
so rom-com.
And it's only when the Madison storyline comes back and she sees that footage that she's pulled back in. There's one other sequence in there around the dean of the university and the dean's daughter. But again, it's like this ping-ponging between the rom-com story, pulling her towards maybe she'll go back and study again. Maybe she'll end up running a cafe or something. She'll choose to fulfill her promise as a young woman. And it's only when she sees that video and, like you said, Stu, sees Ryan's complicitness, that she has fallen in love with someone who witnessed and enabled through rape culture, that obsession, that it then re-triggers it. And I think to your point, Cody, it re-triggers her obsession to the point where she is happy to die.
Yeah.
Because there is no going back for her after seeing that. Like, Ryan was the embodiment of that normal life, and he was part of the rape of his friend.
That's a good analysis.
The line that I've highlighted, 2 lines, is as Al Monroe is killing Cassie, he is saying, this is your fucking fault.
Oh, yeah. It's not subtle.
And then the next morning, one of the best scenes in the whole film is his friend coming in and laughing like, no, you didn't kill the stripper.
Like, that's such a cliche.
Yeah. And the friend says to Al Monroe, this is not your fault.
Yeah, that is a great analysis. That was a good speech, Chaz. So in terms of the things that it is done that keep it fresh, because we have seen revenge stories told from the female perspective before, right? And it was interesting because I was not debating, but talking about like rape revenge as a particular genre, like I Spit on Your Grave. But that person is often the victim, and they are the victim itself rather than avenging a victim, and pursuing people. And in some ways I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting because they can feel like A Spit on Your Grave can finally feel like a reverse slasher film. Like it is like a slasher film. We're on the side of the wronged party.
There was a Jodie Foster film called The Brave One where her boyfriend or husband gets killed and then she goes on the revenge bender.
So, like, you know, and you change the character and it will inevitably change your theme. And part of that idea is that we're so used, particularly in film stories that are dominated by male, that, you know, that we're so used to it that it just, like, gender flipping makes stories more interesting because inevitably will change the way they interact with the world. But you kind of talked about this idea of these nice guys, Cody, and it made me think that, you know, I had this idea back in my What Are the Levers setting, but I think you can break setting into setting and world, and they're different, right? The setting of Get Out is the country house, right?
Yeah.
In the middle of nowhere. That is a classic, but the world is the world of these rich white people, right? The setting of this is in the city, And the world of it is of these nice guys. And it's interesting because that intersects with the genre of the clash of these two genre elements. And I think part of the reason that it does feel fresh is it's brought in, it has two genres that speak to each other that we're not really used to seeing combined. It's a revenge movie / romantic comedy, right? It's not something we're used to kind of having combined in the weird way, like the Blade Runner sci-fi detective hybrid. Like, it's noir, but it's sci-fi. It's like, well, now sci-fi noir is now a thing, right? It's marries up so well, that, I mean, it predates Blade Runner. It's just Philip K. Dick's kind of stuff, so it's kind of chosen genres that speak to the things that it's interested in exploring thematically. And it's interesting that she was the writer in Killing Eve season 2, which is my least favorite season of Killing Eve, but that was definitely about the romance between like Villeneuve and Eve, right? Like, they were definitely upping that idea of it, this kind of like obsessive romance, and so the fact that Emerald's using romantic comedy as a way of commenting on this stuff is interesting.
Yeah, and directed it like a romantic comedy.
Can I distinguish between the tone of this film, which I feel like is another lens again, where it's not the tone of either a revenge thriller or even a romantic comedy. It's like a Wes Anderson, and that's not even tonally right either, but her tone is quite unique, and it's another lens again. Cody, do you think your reactions to this film is about like the story and the script and how it's structured and how it plays out, or is it how that story is presented to you? And those, don't have to be separate things. It's just a dichotomy I've noticed in other people's reactions to this movie.
Yeah, maybe I couldn't get a firm grip of tone of what this was. But mind you, like, I'm not saying I didn't not like the film. I'm just working my way through the film. And I'll probably keep watching it again and again and again.
If you want to talk about films being remarkable and people wanting something distinctive, right, a film that you're still thinking about and trying to work your head around absolutely meets that criteria.
Oh, for sure. And it's probably why it kind of, maybe this is what she wanted, was us to like using romantic comedy where the nice guy always wins, right? Is fucking genius.
Oh, yeah, because romantic comedies, when you watch some of them, are so regressive in their sexual politics, right?
Absolutely. Like, bordering on stalkerish behavior.
Oh, yeah, like the Love Actually storyline with fucking what's-his-face from The Walking Dead holding a sign in front of Keira Knightley. And it's like, why is this being presented as him being romantic? It is fucking stalkerish.
This is your best friend's wife.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's actually probably why it works. Part of maybe the reason why it works is when you look at it, romantic comedies are so much of them is the nice guy is actually not a particularly nice guy.
Yeah. You know what? I think it was the directing that really threw me.
I'm not trying to throw anyone under a bus here.
No, because I remember that, like, I'm pretty sure the music she uses as well. Like, she uses all these conventions of casting those romantic leads. And also the music. Like, I heard the Spice Girls. I'm sure I heard the Spice Girls through this. Paris Hilton. Like, it's all very...
Britney.
Yeah.
Oh, that cover of Toxic is amazing.
It really is.
Turning it into such a creepy song.
I was maybe thrown by that.
Here's how terribly invested I was in the rom-com story. Is she goes to confront Ryan and he doesn't know yet what she knows.
Yeah.
And in that scene, I'm kind of hoping that she has it all, right? I'm kind of hoping still that she makes the relationship with Ryan work.
Yeah.
And then goes and murders Al Monroe. Like, that's the cathartic ending that I wanted. Like, maybe he jumps on board the bandwagon and helps murder Al Monroe. I don't know, right? But that's how much I had been roped into the rom-com storyline. And the way it plays out perfectly in character. Talking to your point, Cody, like, she performs that scene exactly the way that character would do it, where she ends up blackmailing him for the location of the bachelor party and threatens his career and his life.
Which is actually classic kind of revenge Sorry, I'm just thinking of like revenge plot tropes. We haven't, like, there's so much you could actually dive into with this topic. I feel like we're scratched the surface. But like I'm going to threaten you until you give me the address until I can go and kill your big bad is something that we have seen.
Yeah. Even to the end, I was like, Ryan, come on, do something, anything.
Yeah.
And she knew he wouldn't.
Because that was the only scene in the whole film where the two storylines overlap.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't there the cop scene later where the cops come and talk to him?
Yes, but she's dead by that point, so I wouldn't say it's a rom-com.
In terms of weird fucking genre films, we watched Roadhouse for the first time like a month ago. Have you seen it? This Patrick's...
Yeah.
It's fucking amazing. That's a film I have no idea how to take because it's like, it seems like it's deliberately leaning into like the campy, like latent homosexuality of 80s action films, but I'm not sure if that is because it's self-conscious of that or it's just doing that. Like,
but basically, to be successful writers, we need to just make films that we don't know what they are.
Oh, I think she's definitely had stuff that she wanted to talk about, and it's in the film, and it's very explicit. The dialogue is heightened. I don't think anyone in the... It's, as I said, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I can't remember... I did feel like people weren't talking like real people. They were talking a heightened style, right?
Yeah.
That was both like, it felt like it was copy and pasted from like Atlantic articles, you know?
That is true. And me being, of course, the fan of the character, I didn't enjoy the dialogue.
It is, and I'm going to use this not as a criticism, even though it sounds it is deliberately distancing, right? And in a Brechtian sense, right? Like the way it's directed, the way that it's shot, what the music is, it's making you very aware that this is a performance. It's not trying to suck you into the moment. And I think, in fact, the only moment where you are sucked into is where she is being murdered.
Yeah.
And there, there's no music and it's holding on. She's being smothered by a pillow. You don't get access to her performance. It's so horrific and so out of the tone of the film that we've seen up till that point. Like, she's dressed as a, stripper nurse, and there's all those shots. It felt like something out of a bachelor party movie, like out of a Hangover movie or something, the shots of her like giving all the guys alcohol that she's drugged so that they're unconscious. And
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that moment is making you complicit and you're uncomfortable in it because you're shifted into the role of a voyeur where it's distanced you. Whereas in Get Out, it seems like one of their purposes, whether conscious or not, is absolutely telling that story through Chris's experience. Like, we cut away to Rod, but really the film is, once you go onto Chris's story after the cold open, you are with Chris pretty much until the end, right?
Yeah.
You break away for some select moments created for tension, like the auction. Whereas this film, I don't think it's trying to get you inside of Cassie's experience. There are a couple of moments where it's very deliberately doing that, like the moment where it's in a single shot in traffic, like she's just sitting in the middle of the road having a very heightened experience, and a guy comes up and like honks the horn at her and she gets out and just completely smashes the shit out of his car. And that is very deliberately putting us in her point of view, her experience, her catharsis. And that's probably the reason why it's all done in one shot as well. Like it's done in multiple shots, but it's, made to look like it's done in a single shot to put you in her point of view. But the fact that that stands out, whereas most of the film is actually trying to distance you from her.
Or the weird choices around like the center framing and the stuff that I felt was Wes Anderson, but you pointed out could feel like interrogating these characters, like confessing, like what Errol Morris calls like the Interrotron or whatever that camera he uses for his interviews with the mirror.
Yeah.
Where they can look at him, but they're actually eyeballing the camera.
Yeah.
It's just interesting because I just don't know whether it's Wes Anderson or like Errol Morris, like give enough people rope and they hang themselves in terms of his documentaries.
Well, I think it's a combination of the two. The Wes Anderson thing, it's not just about center framing. Like the set design of her house and the cafe and the pharmacy and the color design, like the pinks and blues and yeah, I think there's reason why we keep pulling that name, even though this doesn't feel like a Wes Anderson film at all.
No.
But it's like elements.
But it's using conventions of a genre that he, like, if we want to talk about genres, Wes Anderson, like, is becoming his own genre because he's established these patterns that creates this interesting emotional effect, right? His combination of using, like, those dioramas, right? It has this distancing effect and all that kind of stuff, and it's kind of its own genre and it's got its own emotional effect on the audience. And so when another filmmaker uses those conventions, we're going to be like, hang on, are you trying to make me feel like I'm in a Wes Anderson film, or are you trying to make me feel someone else? So it's something almost you're going to be conscious of, right? That tone is so important. We're touching on directing stuff, but tone, I do think, talks about like the distancing effect and point of view is all about tone. And the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre being shot like basically handheld on like shitty 16mm stock, like it's so fucking grubby. It's like splatterpunk. That part of the horror convention around that is the aesthetic, but the aesthetic is connected to tone. And it is interesting that Get Out is kind of like sunny horror for like the first half. Like it resists that, which is different from Invisible Man, which definitely leans a lot more into nighttime horror.
Was that a segue?
Nice transition, Stu. Yeah.
That was, that was a segue. Aha.
As the attorney representing Adrian's trust, I'm required to read a prepared statement. Cecilia, although our relationship was far from perfect, I thought that you would talk to me rather than run away.
Are you okay? What happened to him?
He cut his wrist. Per his final wishes, you're getting $5 million. Contingent, of course, on the fine print.
He can't be ruled to be mentally incompetent.
All right. So, The Invisible Man is a 2020 science fiction horror film written and directed by Lee Winnell that's kind of takes the inspiration from H.G. Wells' novel of the same name. It focuses on Elizabeth Moss's character, who is called Cecilia, as she kind of believes that she is being stalked by her apparently deceased ex-boyfriend. That's kind of it. I guess that's kind of the setup, right? That's essentially what it is. The opening of the film, which is a great cold open because it's the whole like we're catching up on what is happening and we're filling in the blanks, is we follow this woman in this really rich house. She wakes up. There's some really great little detail moments that tell the story. Like she wakes up at night and then she takes the blanket off and then you see a hand on her and then she kind of like gently pries it off her. And we're kind of catching up the whole time and realizing she's trying to escape. And then very early on, you see her run past the mad scientist lab, kind of like the Get Out lab downstairs, talk about leaning into conventions. And there's something in there. And then she goes and stays with a friend of her sister's and claims that she is being stalked by her ex-boyfriend. And then it's revealed that her ex-boyfriend is dead. And she tries to convince everyone that he's not dead. And then, in fact, he is invisible.
So what are your guys' genre expectations going into a movie called The Invisible Man?
Invisibility. Yeah. And a man.
And a man.
Oh, my God.
This one, I felt I knew exactly all the beats it was going to hit. It hit all the beats. And I really fucking enjoyed all the beats.
Can you, rather than me doing it this time, do you want to tell me what those beats were that you anticipated, like, as you were watching the film?
Right. Okay. Like, so we set this up. She's obviously in a very abusive relationship and she's escaping. So I knew she was going to escape, find a nice place, safe place to stay, but it's not going to stay safe for long. And she's, I guess, sucked back into the world of her abusive ex via his death, air quote. And then shit starts to go wrong, right? And she has to fight. And she's being so totally gaslit. I'm not crazy. He's still alive. He's invisible. And I knew that she'd eventually have to, like, take it in her own hands and
Ripley the shit out of it. Get away from her, you bitch.
Exactly. And that she'd win and that would probably fuck her up because she'd have to do something that probably wasn't in her character.
I felt all of those things, other than there was one point in the movie where I was like, I actually don't know where this is going, which was the asylum sequence.
Oh, fuck, yeah. I forgot about that.
Just after the midpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, we can go through the film in order. I was just saying it was a moment of this, like a sequence of this film where I'm like, I have no fucking idea what's going to happen next.
Yeah, such a great midpoint. So the midpoint is she arranges a meeting with her sister who doesn't believe in any of this shit going on with the Invisible Man, her ex-boyfriend who's dead, and arranges to meet her in a very public place. And then basically, without warning, her sister's throat is slit and the knife is put in her hand and she's arrested, right? So again, it's so like that Get Out beat, which is the lights are coming and you're like, she'll convince them that she didn't do this. No. They just commit her, right? She doesn't even get a fucking trial. And you're just like, hang on, where does this story go from here? Because what does the Invisible Man want from her at this point, right? Like, get confused by what the monster's is the monster just going to sneak in there and kill her, torment her?
I mean, doesn't she have a line in the interrogation where she's like, what do you want? You've taken everything from me.
Yeah. And then we actually learn what the monster wants at this point.
Yeah.
It changes because the monster learns something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that shifts, the movie pivots back onto its genre rails when he learns that she's pregnant. Because he stops wanting to control and torture. I mean, he keeps wanting to control her, but he's not trying to torture her to wherever point he was hoping to get to. He now wants her to come and play happy families with him.
Yeah.
So his objective changes, and that puts her back in control to then resume the beats that you were talking about, Cody.
She can fight back because he's actually vulnerable now.
Yeah.
Thematically, because I think what unites all three of these films is they're interested, part of what they were doing that kept them fresh was they were just interested exploring new ideas within the kind of conventions of the genre. We obviously talked about Get Out, Promising Young Woman, Revenge, Dig Two Graves, what is the cost of revenge? They are still exploring that. And they're exploring more, obviously, like rape culture stuff, but what is the cost of a woman pursuing justice in rape culture? Could be a very specific articulation of that broader idea, right? And the fact is, for her to get revenge, it cost her own life, right? And I think that is still a relevant conversation. Just look at the way that like Grace Tam is being absolutely hounded by the press, right? And like Brittany Higgins and all these women that actually speak out pay a high price. So it's a very relevant genre in terms of the larger conversation. Invisibility as an idea, and obviously there's the H.G. Wells novel. I'm going to say Plato, but don't believe quotes here on the internet. But there was this idea from maybe Plato, I don't know, maybe like ancient philosopher Stuo, said that like morality is basically a performance. If individuals could not be seen, then they would not perform morally. So I think the traditional invisibility stories are characters struggling with their own morality. Okay. And I've been watching for the first time Misfits, which is fantastic. And the character in that, Ramsay Bolton, is the invisibility character. And the whole thing is him getting the opportunity to do things that are kind of bad. What's interesting about The Invisible Man is it is interesting that idea of someone whose morality is taken away by being invisible, but it makes them the monster, right? It turns them into the victim of that. So it changes the point of view of the character. And then it can become a story about how domestic violence victims are kind of, all the perpetrators are invisible and the victims aren't believed. Like it uses that to become an analogy around abusive relationships. I think that's fascinating because it's still within the territory of what the genre is conventionally about. It's just a very specific understanding of it that is relevant to kind of the larger cultural conversation. And they make choices what they're doing with the story in order to enable that.
I 100% agree. And I just want to reinforce it a little bit. So you're absolutely correct in that the trope of the Invisible Man, it was a Universal movie. So it did have, at the time it was up there with Dracula and there were established tropes around the story. And it was in fact reinforced by the movie starring Kevin Bacon called Hollow Man.
Oh yeah, Paul Verhoeven.
It was Paul Verhoeven. Okay, thank goodness. I was going to throw that name out and then be embarrassed when I got it wrong.
Of course, Paul Verhoeven did Hollow Man. It's about perversion and voyeurism.
Yeah, and the story is nearly always about the person who has made themselves invisible, and like you said, how being invisible releases you from consequences for your actions.
Yes,
and then the corruption that can instill on your spirit. Now, for me, I think a lot of people would have said, the key shift around The Invisible Man is that it's the gender swapping, like the female lead. But I think that misses the point in that, if they were just doing quote unquote gender swapping, they would have made a female Invisible Man. And it would have been an interesting difference, right? Like what does a woman with unlimited power look like? What does her moral spectrum or slide look like that's different? But what they did differently in this film is they told it from the perspective of the victim of the Invisible Man. And the only other film that I can think of, because it's also a gothic horror thing, is The Secret of Mary Riley. Did either of you guys see that?
No.
It's an amazing film that no one talks about. It's Julia Roberts and John Malkovich, and it's the story of Jekyll and Hyde told from his housekeeper's point of view.
Oh, wow.
It is fucking amazing, and no one ever talks about it. Anyway, to me, the big shift that this film does, and obviously it's aware of its theme. It's obviously trying to comment, like use this science fiction horror analogy to talk about domestic violence and, abusive relationships and control that can happen and how invisible women often are in those relationships. Of course, that's what it's doing. But to me, the huge shift, the big lever that Leigh Whannell has pulled is saying, we're going to tell the Invisible Man story from the point of view of his girlfriend. You are never really in Adrian. You don't even see Adrian really, other than that flash where he punches through the car window in the cold open. You don't really see him until the final scene of the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, and when he punches through the glass, it's a great beat because it's fucking terrifying. And two, it says this guy is out of control because he doesn't fear consequence. So he's invisible already because he's rich.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what I was going to say, Stu. He doesn't have a character journey because he had all the control before over her, right? And what he wanted was to control her. All he's using the invisibility for and faking his own death is to continue to control her.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a character journey at all.
Oh, no, he is the monster.
Yeah. He's like the shark, essentially, in Jaws.
Yeah. He cannot be, as we've talked about before, he's not something that you can reason with, right?
Oh, yeah.
You'll never negotiate with Adrian. You're never going to convince him to stop abusing you.
So audience members that have no knowledge of the history of the Invisible Man in terms of text, the book, the films, do you think they would see this as fresh take on genre?
Yeah. Like there's a cultural discussion at the moment around gaslighting.
Yeah.
Right. So I do think you don't have to know anything about any of the genre history because it stops, right? Like my knowledge of genre history of the canon is Western. It's not just Western. It's going to be very English. What you think of science fiction is very relevant to where you are in time.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein may be the first science fiction novel, but it's only because we're now living in the bubble of the Industrial Revolution. I'm sure there was kind of, for people in the 15th century, I mean, I don't know, telling stories about what the future would be. There's a great comic strip. There was a series of like 5 comic strips called like caveman science fiction. And it's like a guy like learning how to make fire and his friend is like, don't play God. And then the next panel is just like the whole forest on fire. Right. And it's a series of just riffs on this stuff that like science fiction is always kind of in a way about the present. And I just say that because I don't think you can make any assumptions and it's very culturally biased, right? And I am as much of a victim of that. So the canon is problematic as an idea.
I mean, like I said, the Invisible Man canon is not as well known as, let's say, vampires or werewolves, right? It's not as well explored. And the three of us are obviously film-oriented content consumers. We would have all gone into that movie because it was marketed to us, the sci-fi take on gaslighting starring Elizabeth Moss, right? Like we had our expectations set for us differently. But to me, like if we're taking knowledge of that out, I think most people would go to see a film called The Invisible Man, expecting to see a film about the Invisible Man.
But they'd also, what does that mean? It means we're going to say cool, terrifying sequences of people like fighting someone who's invisible, right? Like the film absolutely delivers on the spectacle in the same way that Get Out still gives you fucking violent murder at the end. This gives you awesome sequences, like terrifying sequences, and they used in the trailer, like when the gas gets turned on and the eggs boil and the knife falls off but doesn't make a sound, but also all the fight sequence, like an absolute, and the rain sequence, like the rain with invisible people, like I think Hollow Man does some stuff with water, right? So it's delivering at least the visual conventions of what we expect.
Yes.
Now, if I can make some comments around genre and this film.
You may.
Like, the opening sequence is one of the best short films I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how silent it is. That's that sequence that we've already lauded. The next sequence is very short, and it's delving into what is her experience as someone who's survived an abusive relationship. It's setting up her sister, her new living arrangement, the fact that she can't even walk to the post box without fear, those kind of things. And the news of Adrian's death comes to her. And the whole next sequence, the audience knows, right? It's called The Fucking Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Right? So the audience goes into this film knowing that Adrian is not dead and he is alive and he is invisible. Right? It's in the name of the fucking movie. But for a shortish sequence, it is positing that maybe she's crazy.
Yeah.
To me, it's some of the best filmmaking he does because the camera is driving the tension. He has lots of observational stuff where he's like around corners and he's watching her.
Oh, and they frame it to look like there should be two people in the shot. Oh, there's just that great thing where it just finds the couch and frames the couch if there's a character sitting there, and then just pans back. So good.
Yeah, and it's basically using camera work and direction to make you feel like he's there without really doing anything more than that, right? It's making you feel voyeuristic. It's actually putting you in the point of view from a camera perspective of the Invisible Man.
Maybe it's doing both. It
does both. Yeah.
It treats her seeing him in quiet places, and it sets it up really early. In that great opening sequence, we have a shot that goes off her as she's getting dressed. It's very reminiscent of Taxi Driver, where it just pans / dollies, does a bit of both, finds the empty corridor and then comes back. And it's setting up the language of this film, which is we're just going to move off. We're just going to do a quote-unquote unmotivated camera move. And it'd be really interesting to see if they wrote that stuff in the script.
Yeah, I want to read the script now.
But there's a moment where you see his breath outside.
Oh.
That it's like the moment in Get Out when Chris goes upstairs and everyone goes silent and looks upstairs. It's basically saying to the audience, this is not a big metaphor. She's not crazy.
Yeah.
He is the Invisible Man. He's real. And then the next sequence question is, when will Cecilia learn that he's real? Right?
Yes.
How far can Adrian push her until she thinks that he's real? Right?
Knows, absolutely is convinced.
Yeah. And can he make her doubt her own sanity? To me is the question, because the audience has been told that Adrian is real, right? And she's suspecting, but everyone else is telling her to doubt her reality, right?
Yeah.
So can he make her doubt her own sanity? And to me, the point where that question stops is the point where the young girl that she's living with, Sydney, when Adrian punches the young girl, going back to the theme of exploring the invisibility of domestic violence, Adrian is deliberately alienating, cutting her off from everyone.
Yes.
Right? So he punches Sydney to make the father and Sydney leave her. She loses allies, right? But from a character perspective, from Cecilia's point of view, she now knows that Adrian is real and he's out there. And now the question for the audience that the film is posing is, can Cecilia convince other people in her life that Adrian is alive and invisible?
And the answer is no. Because she goes to convince her sister. She thinks she's got the evidence. We think she's going to convince her sister. And then she gets thrown in a mental institution.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's my favorite sequence of the movie, because if we were playing this out in a cliched way, I guess, she has the evidence. She could now start convincing people in her life that Adrian is real, and they might set up a trap for him, right? Like her having that evidence that invisibility is possible could have led to a very different sequence if we're talking about just like genre cliches. But that's why that sequence is amazing.
Or I also, and this ties into some of the stuff, you even talked on about like the hero's journey stuff. We're so used to, we've been like fucking Pavlov's dogged about third act structure that we're so used to the characters losing 2/3 into the film, right? The lowest point of the film being 2/3 into the film, and they go into the victory, right? We're so used to that rhythm that when they actually bring that forward and make it happen at the midpoint, right? You're like, the film can't be 2/3 over. It's only been like fucking 45 minutes. And you just feel the rhythm. And so you feel really discombobulated because it's placing the lowest point much earlier in the film than we're used to. And it's something that really frustrates me about all that act structure is we just get this feedback loop of people getting trained to expect things with films, and then they read a script that doesn't hit to their understanding of their conventions the way they've been trained, and they think the script is bad, as opposed to I'm just so used to a song going verse, chorus, middle eight, chorus, that if they do something different from that, we think it's a bad song, as opposed to maybe that is a really great idea going verse, middle eight, and not fulfilling our expectations or shifting them.
Breaking rules.
Yeah, breaking rules, but also like not. But it also completely works in character. Like I think we fully expect that he seems to be getting more and more brazen. The Invisible Man is getting more and more brazen of what he's willing to do. It's almost like he's testing how cool his technology is. So it's like, hang on, can I murder someone in the middle of the room? Right? And then the answer is yes. So it's interesting. We don't really know him as a character, but he seems to be seeing more and more audacious. Right?
But it's also, to me, the types of genre, like the subgenres of horror movie, change with each sequence question, right? So that opening is just a masterclass in like tension.
Yeah. Will she escape? Once you understand what is she doing becomes will she escape? Yeah.
Yeah. And there is a jump scare at the end there, but for the most part, it's just fear. It's just like this unrelenting escalating.
I'm yelling at the screen.
Yeah.
And you say leave the dog, not because it's the wrong thing for her character to do, because she clearly cares about the dog, and if you're in an abusive relationship, he's probably abusive to the dog that's loyal even if you kick them. But we know our genre awareness tells us of, no, that's what's going to fuck you up. And it's such a great moment for the audience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it establishes her as caring, but also like, ah!
But in the next sequence, it's all about this voyeuristic psychological horror. And then as soon as you get to the point where she's convinced he's real, like she's done the coffee grounds on the floor and she's talking to him, and it's cutting to the hallway where she thinks he is and he could well be, but she doesn't know. And she throws the paint on his face, and he's texted her and he said, surprise, right? As soon as she knows that he's real, he's happy to physically assault her. And that's when you get the first invisibility fight. Also because no one else is witnessing.
Except us.
Yes.
And then that leads us to discover the suit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool analysis, Chaz.
Why? Thank you.
You're very visible to us. We see you.
But the sequence in it's actually, there's kind of two sequences in the mental asylum after that glorious midpoint.
There's the Sarah Connor sequence, and then there's...
Yeah. It's Terminator 2.
It is Terminator 2. It is like, the Terminator is coming. There's no such thing as the Terminator, and the Terminator turns up and kills everyone. It is Terminator 2. That's exactly what it is.
Because that sequence is, like you said, first of all, it's fulfilling on the genre promise.
Yeah.
Right? We are seeing an invisible man fuck shit up because he can get away with it.
Oh, like him taunting the guy with the gun when it comes to the fight. But yeah, we're jumping ahead.
I mean, I'm skipping over that really great, like Elizabeth Moss gives such a fucking great performance. He has tortured her to the brink of insanity, has her locked up for the rest of her life, and it's only because she's pregnant that he now changes his offerings, and it gives her power to threaten him with her own suicide, and that's what allows her to attack him and escape and gain the upper hand.
And what is great about that moment, so I watched this with Emma for the first time, and she was like, no, she wouldn't. Like, she was like, is she actually trying to commit suicide? Like, she didn't fully, we go behind Cecilia's plan. And it makes it a really cool, scary moment when she starts, and they make it so graphic, her slicing her wrist open.
And that sequence, then culminates in this amazing action sequence that, again, Stu, that's like you're saying, it's delivering on the audience expectation, right? They want cool action sequences. And this is like back on back like that. You've got the breakout of the mental asylum. You've got the rain outside in the car park. And then you've got the fist fight in the suburban house, right? It's just delivery on all the genre promises of an Invisible Man movie.
In terms of tropes and sequences, like micro-plotting stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Just to come back, my separation between overall structure and like micro-plotting. Micro-plotting are like sequences like that.
100%. I'm just talking about, like, going back to you, they've delivered on the emotional, Lee Winnell in particular has delivered on the emotional contract with the audience, which then allows him to almost write an entirely different third act.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued.
Because he doesn't have to have a big physical climax of invisibility in the final act, because he's delivered on all that beforehand.
Agreed.
And so the final sequence of the film can just be, she's now in control.
Yeah.
She's pregnant. The world knows that invisibility is possible. So he can't gaslight her in the same way that he did in the past.
No, he's lost his power.
Mm-hmm. And it was very clever in setting up that she found the suit and hid it earlier.
Yeah.
And so that final scene can be that cathartic thing that we want from a film that is about a domestic violence survivor, which is that domestic violence survivor confronting her abuser, making him confess that he is an abuser, and then murdering the shit out of him.
The weird ending of the film is her reactions to all this shit. I have no idea how I meant to feel about Cecilia at the end of this film. Like the way it lingers on her, and it's like, did she take pleasure from this? Like, I think it's a really interesting ending because it's so ambiguous.
It is ambiguous, but also what from a woman, we look at her journey, her character journey, from a woman that had no power ends up with all the power. And I fucking love that. Even though you're like, I'm not sure this power will be used for good.
She's quite literally taken the suit from him. So yeah, I guess you're
exactly.
right. She's literally taking his power.
Yeah. Well, also, it's almost like I planned this. But the film could have been called The Invisible Woman because it's about a woman who gains her power through invisibility to a point that she can get away with murder.
Yeah.
So Lee Winnell has ingeniously actually fulfilled the original H.G. Wells trope of the Invisible Man, but with the Invisible Woman.
Yeah.
Because she deliberately walks out with the suit as well.
Which I read like, oh, they're going to do a sequel. That was my 100%. Kind of like add-on.
Definitely leaving that open.
They made however many Insidious films. So I'm sure Lee Winnell and Saw films has got an awareness.
Oh, in July 2020, it was officially announced that Winnell is working on a sequel.
Wow.
Knew it. Called it. We all called it.
And that might be called The Invisible Woman, and it might follow the more traditional, I say traditional.
Yeah.
And then it's possibly leading into the trope of people that are abuse victims become abusers.
Yeah.
Which is obviously not fucking true, but it is something that is part of popular culture, so maybe it's going to be exploring that. I can't find the script. I had a script called The Invisible Woman from the 2012 Blacklist.
Oh.
Yeah, so I can't find that exact line, but let's just take that they've been subtle. I just had a slightly different interpretation of the ending, but I don't think it changes anything in terms of how it keeps genre fresh, right? Like it has changed the point of like it's not just gender flipped, it's like a POV flipped.
POV flipped, yeah.
Right? Like it's like we're going to tell the story of Chucky from the point of view of the doll. Right? That's our take on Chucky.
We're going to tell Jaws from the point of view of the shark.
Yeah.
That's not what this is doing, but could you imagine how different, how fresh such a genre film would be?
What's so interesting about the superhero genre being so fucking everywhere at the moment is that shows can play with inverting the conventions of it that you know, to mention Peacemaker, it's dealing with a second tier villain in a world with the Justice League, right? And then there's other, like Harley Quinn is about playing with those conventions and changing, you're Harley Quinn, and there's like the fucking Batman and the Joker and all that stuff, right? You know, at some point, like one of my favorite comic properties that someone's going to adapt now because it's DCEU is the character called the Hitman, right? And the Hitman in the DCEU, Garth Ennis, is a character who basically takes contracts out on like superheroes, supervillains, doesn't care. And his superpower is his gun never misses, right? And that's it.
What's that?
Yeah, it's fucking hilarious, right?
Yeah.
And it's also like he mostly just gets hired to take out like the C-list superheroes, the supervillains, right? Like it's all like, because you can't kill Batman, but it's interesting because this is the inversion of something, but from something that isn't so well known, right? It's not like the Invisible. It's like something that's kind of like part of the culture, but it's not like I've read the H.G. Novels book, right?
Yeah, this is what I mean. Like, people aren't going to walk in, all of them, knowing the yarn about the book. But, yeah, it feels so fresh.
So is part of what you have to do is like find like an obscure 1800s science fiction novel and go, I'm going to do the
This.
But like I feel like I don't want to turn into an interview show, but like Firebite, the show that you've worked on, you're vampires in Australia, right? And so you're taking something that's conventional and find a fresh take on it. Did you talk about theme?
Yeah, the theme when I went into the writer's room was pretty much we're talking about colonization here, that vampires came over on a ship and are colonizing their way across Australia. But for me, like, that's what is the beauty of genre in TV. Like, we can talk about it, like Buffy. I'm wearing a Buffy shirt.
Invisible Man, the Invisible Woman character, they do that in Buffy. With the Clea DuVall character, right? And she, because she's invisible, she becomes invisible because people ignore her, but because they ignore her, she becomes invisible, and that allows her to take revenge.
Exactly.
And we're totally playing with that trope as well.
Well, because Buffy really is about high school being hell. Literally on hell, the hellmouth. So,
and turns out your showrunner is the devil as well.
And also that. But that doesn't take away from Buffy.
It does not.
So, yeah, that's what I love about writing these things, that, there's this overarching fucking theme. I can tell those stories through the simple exchange of characters, like dialogue between characters, which is what I do best. And then the beauty of a writer's room is that you get people with other skills that can bring in the action sequences and all the plotting and making the mystery. I tell you what, mystery is the hardest of all genres to write, because we as consumers and audiences know, we're so clued into how story works. And so making good mystery is really hard.
Yeah, and I actually think it's telling that we didn't pick a mystery, because I was thinking about that too. Like, because it's a feeling, but it is very, audiences like to think and they want to be engaged intellectually, and they're going to be trying to fucking think ahead and outsmart you.
They'll know because they've seen all the, like, how we trick audience members. So that is like the most challenging thing to write. And sometimes I'm like, can't I just do a romantic comedy? So
yeah, you hit the conventions and everyone loves you. If you make the murderer too easy to guess in, Mystery Road, then they'll be like, oh, I saw that back in episode 2. Ugh.
Yeah, but with The Invisible Man, it really, maybe because we were in the middle of a pandemic, but going to the cinema again, watching a film that wasn't about superheroes, it was just a really good, on the edge of your seat film, and just a really well directed. Like, I felt tense all the way through it, and I was screaming at the character, and I wanted her to win, and I really loved the ending, that she just, whatever that ending meant, she did in the end get her power back. So
and that's actually interesting. All three of them have a kind of positive catharsis, right?
Yeah.
So the emotional experience for the audience is like, like a kind of bit of a relief or something about it.
But that might be our selection bias.
Maybe.
Yeah, but all three of these films dominated the conversation about like genre films.
Yes, yeah. And look, maybe that's a sad point, though, that maybe to dominate the Western intellectual conversation about films, you need a positive ending.
I mean, Parasite did as well, and like had a lot of conversation around it, and it is not a happy ending. But it kind of gives you the happy ending, and then it goes, ha, 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 fuck you.
Surprise.
So let's kind of bring back to like, you know, stray observations, learning, and wrap up. Because we've talked a lot about these things, and it feels like, I just feel like we could spend 2 hours and we'd only be scratching the surface of what they do.
Yes.
Is there any kind of key learning that has kind of surprised you?
I write from feeling. That's such a wanky thing to say, but I do. And I think sometimes I am guilty of going, all right, I just need to structure this however we structure. This was such a great reminder of, no, fuck that. Let's break the rules and make something interesting. And that's what I really love being reminded of in watching these films, is like genre mashing, whatever you want to call it. Like there is no set rules that you have to follow. You can talk about these themes in interesting ways. And I fucking love being reminded of that, because sometimes you do get caught in the machine, as we call it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Because I just love listening to you guys. I sat there, I'm like, oh shit, I'm actually a participant in this. But listening to the breakdown, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll steal that. Because, you know, we're allowed to steal each other's ideas.
100%.
And I think,
what are the things you most want to steal from this episode?
Like with the Invisible Man in particular, or even Promising Young Woman, that was a very interesting conversation for me, because I'm still, of course, muddling over this film, but I'm like, yeah, we're still talking about it. So maybe that's what she wanted. She got what she wanted.
Yeah.
So maybe I can go make a rom-com and sci-fi, you know, mash those two genres.
Just don't make Passengers, okay?
Okay.
well, that's
try not
because
to.
that leads into the like fucking creepiness. And it kind of doesn't
Talking about rape culture.
and then kind of like hangs the hat on the creepiness, but then also not. I don't know. It's so fucking weird.
It hangs the hat on the rape culture, like he raped her life and then ended with her forgiving him for raping her life.
Yeah. Fucking terrible.
But that you actually see why combining those two genres is actually really smart.
No, so I'm feeling inspired again. So thank you.
That's great. I mean, coming back to your writing characters from feeling, I think part of that is what makes Invisible Man, that moment with her seeing her sister, is that's what the character would do at that point in time. And so I'm saying it's genius because they brought it early, but maybe it's not him going, oh, I need to bring it early and surprise the audience, like a kind of, maybe him just going, that's what she would do at this point in time. So let's just do that. Right.
That's what I mean about like following what the character would do instead of what the plot would do. And I think that's what he did. Well, I hope that's what he did.
I feel that's good advice for no matter what kind of story you're writing. Because the one moment that I was quibbling about in Get Out was probably the one moment where I didn't feel the character was following what they would do.
And what's interesting, because Promising Young Woman is less about the characters as people and more the characters as like vehicles for ideas, right?
Yes.
That
is so
it's
true.
And look, characters are an illusion, right? Characters are a magic trick that you cast on the audience, particularly on the page. If you're a writer, the fucking illusion that these words on the page feels like a real person is an amazing magic trick. But the illusion, you have to cast that illusion on you as the writer first, right? You kind of need to believe that they're real people, but sometimes I don't know if people, there's moments that certainly you kind of look at characters more analytically as not as objects that deliver words, you know. They're just objects to bounce light off, as the joke was.
Yeah, because I wonder if that's what Emerald was thinking when she wrote, because I get this makes me sound like I belong in an asylum. I get very emotionally attached to my characters to the point I start feeling what they're feeling, and I like go through when I wrote the very last episode of Firebite and I finished the character's journey, I cried. I actually like fucking cried because I knew this would be the last time I'd be with these characters. And I'm wondering what Emerald's writing process is, if it was just vehicles for ideas.
It's hard to tell. I mean, we're just reverse engineering from what we see on the screen, but yeah. I mean, it's a good reminder for us, like, because I think for me, I mean, it's not what I learned during this episode. I mean, I think the most interesting thing from this was like the genre mash for Promising Young Woman, and that kind of made me really think about genre mashes because it's not something we've talked about on this episode, but like coming back to my levers thing and what all those settings and stuff like that, to me, like, I do that because it helps me think about genre mashes, right? Like, Alien is such an interesting film, and I fucking, every time I watch it, just gets better and better. Like, it is kind of like a miracle of a film because it combines, you know, to me, science fiction is about awe. The emotion of science fiction is awe, and awe can be horrifying and awe can be amazing, and often it's both. And Alien has this moment of awe to do with we're on this alien planet and we're finding this like cosmic horror elements, and then it turns into a slasher film and it combines something. And we're working on a project that's like werewolves and high school told through the lens. Ooh. Yeah. It's the idea behind it. And it's part of the reason we do it. I like Jazz is looking at me like, maybe you shouldn't give this away. But it's kind of like the idea of telling the story about the radicalization of young men that is occurring into like men's rights and like fucking Jordan Peterson and stuff like that is analogous to them kind of becoming werewolves and using the werewolf story to tell that. And part of me is like, the tension with that idea is how much do you lean into the werewolf side of things and how much do you lean into the high school side of things? And maybe we need some more conventional sequences that we literally just go do the equivalent of Invisible Man and go, we're going to do the high school party where everyone gets fucking drunk, because we've all seen this before, but we haven't seen this scene before with a group of characters that are werewolves, quote unquote werewolves, right? And maybe that's what we do. We actually take that conventional moment and then tell it through the spin, and it's suddenly really fresh, but people are satisfied because they've seen the thing they're expecting, but then they're finding the spin on it.
I think you're onto something here.
I think you've just summarized what the point of this episode is, which if you want to keep genre fresh, show people the thing that they've seen many times before, but different.
Make it fresh. Do the genre, but make it fresh.
And hopefully
took us 2.5 hours to just repeat the title.
Summed it up. Thank you.
But look, hopefully in listening to this, you've got some micro tools for doing that.
Which would be like changing who your character is going to change your plot, right? Yeah. Changing your theme is going to change everything else, because what is theme but like the meaning of the story is the organization of all the elements of that story. So if you change what you're trying to fucking say, you're going to change the organization of those. But even just changing the setting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
None of these actually are particularly interesting in terms of what they do with the setting. They actually lean into their settings, right? But anyway, that's a separate conversation.
I think the one gaping hole in this discussion, which could be a future episode, is the John Wick kind of things. The ones that lean into their genre so hard that they work just by leaning in hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't make me feel fresh. John Wick
felt fresh.
Is like the best stunt choreographers in the fucking business doing those stunts. Like, it is a dance movie with guns done by the best dancers in the world.
100%. But why had no one thought of doing that in the last 50 years?
Maybe if you've been watching Hong Kong cinema, right? Like,
yeah, but
it's like the Matrix feels really fresh, but then you suddenly like it's them ripping off Hong Kong action cinema and wuxia.
To me, I actually prefer The Raid as an example over John Wick. I feel like that's a better example of just like dialing up genre elements. Maybe we'll look at The Raid in some other context. But for me, the two main lessons I've learned from this is you don't have to pull every lever to keep genre fresh.
And you shouldn't. I don't think you should.
Yeah.
I think, in Get Out, the levers that Jordan Peele left alone are equally responsible for what makes it powerful as for the levers he pulled. Does that make sense?
Cody's nodding her head for those who can't see her, which is everyone.
Oh, shit. I get so engaged with what you guys say that I'm just like...
You're air quoting and nodding your head and giving thumbs up.
Yeah.
I mean, Promising Young Woman did a genre mash in a way that I think I haven't seen in any other film, and that's what makes it stand apart. So you can look at two different genres that haven't been mashed before and try and mash them as successfully as Emerald mashed them in that film.
And they're tonally very different, right?
Yeah.
There's like Seven is a horror movie meets like serial killer. But that genre mash has been done a bunch of times, right?
Yeah.
To me, that was like film noir meets horror.
Yeah, that's film noir and horror. Yeah, you're right.
That's a shot, by the way.
I'm already drunk. It's fine. And The Invisible Man does the same thing. Like, it pulls a couple of levers really hard, but then leaves the other levers. My other big thing that I've taken from this, and it's something that I observed in The Invisible Man in that asylum sequence, which is blow up your story. But the thing that it was listening to Cody that made me realize is it only had to blow up its story for a sequence to make it feel fresh. Yeah. And I feel like the other films do that as well, right? Like Promising Young Woman does it near the end, right? Where she fucking dies.
And then the film keeps going. So there's a whole sequence where your lead character is dead.
Yeah.
And what does Get Out? Oh, yeah, the garden sequence? Are we going to say at my point of the... Yeah, we'll go with that.
So I think if you want to keep something fresh, fucking blow up your film, but you don't have to blow it up for the entirety of the film. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You can create a 20-minute sequence where the audience feels like, I have never fucking seen anything like this before in my life. And then you put them back on the rails, deliver on the promise of the genre that you and the audience contract that you created at the beginning of the film, and still leave them walking out feeling like I've never seen anything like that before.
True.
We have some work to do on our scripts, Chaz.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm like, fuck, I need to go back to my scripts and rewrite.
Yeah. I think that's a good place any to end.
All of us recognizing what poor writers we are.
Yeah, I fail.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Cody. I know it's late, particularly if you're in pre-production. You probably got like a fucking 7 a.m. call or something ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. But, it's fun. It's fun what we do. We make up stories for a living.
Oh, it's great. It is fun.
Can't complain. But I will.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And special thanks to our Patreon for letting us bring you and them, I guess, more Draft Zero more often, especially Randy, Thomas, Alex, Garrett, Jennifer, Jesse, Crob, Lee, Sandra, Theus, and Bjorn. You guys absolutely rock our world. We're very touched by your support of the show.
I hope you all feel like arguing with either Stu or myself
about anything on this episode or anything in general.
And you can find many ways of getting in touch with us at our website at draft-zero.com.
At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes,
as well as links to support us and spread the word for free via a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Very important for spreading the word.
Or if you think that what we do here is worth $1 or preferably more than $1, then you can also find links to our Patreon page to support us getting these episodes to you quicker. Thanks.
And thanks for listening.